to now adjourn. Kenny MacAskill.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. A just transition was proclaimed when COP26 was held in Glasgow in 2021. And whilst the global jamboree may have underwhelmed in so many respects, in one aspect it was at the forefront. For as we transition from fossil fuels to renewables, not just countries but businesses, communities and workers were to be supported. Entire industries required to be run down or forsaken, and decent jobs given up, even lifelong careers. However, financial support was to be given to assist nations in that journey. As for workers, assurances were made that in the transition to net zero, they would be protected and long-held rights would be assured, justice for workers as well as for our planet. And it was echoed out with the global gathering endorsed by the UK government. It has been championed by them since in the Green Jobs Task Force and chorused by the Scottish Government in their Just Transition Commission. The rhetoric has been fairness and equity for those whose work would require to change. In Scotland and the UK as a whole, the sector most affected is in the North Sea. Through extraction of oil and gas is still required, we are on a journey to decarbonise and transition to renewables. It is a transition, but it must be a just one. That sector has provided huge wealth and benefit to our society, and many who worked hard in those difficult and often dangerous conditions are now moving into renewables. Where once it was oil and gas, it is now becoming wind, wave and tidal. Let's not forget that we recently had a Prime Minister who championed it as the Saudi Arabia of wind. It's a move that matters for our nations and will create wealth, as well as providing hope for our planet. But recent events in the North Sea have disclosed that whilst there's a transition in the economy, there's no just transition for those working in that new and growing sector. Primarily in the maritime sector, where minimum wage law does not apply consistently and immigration law is used as a crude instrument to profit from seafarer exploitation. That, though, is a debate for another day. Tonight I want to raise the issue of employment rights and especially the effectiveness of health and safety legislation, which is too easily avoided. The lack of consistent and effective offshore safety legislation has been brought to light by a recent tragedy. We must hope that from that sorrow there will come some solace with the remedying of the legislative gap that exists. For this affects hundreds, if not thousands, of workers in the offshore energy supply chain, sailing not just out of existing offshore hubs like Aberdeen or Dundee, but from Eyemouth, Montrose, Fraserburgh, Wick, Buckie, and other Scottish ports involved in delivering a successful offshore wind industry. Also, those in England servicing energy installations in the North Sea, from Humberside, Tyneside, Teesside or East Anglia, along with those who will be embarking from Holyhead, Milford Haven, Moston and other ports in Wales. At present, the framework of statutory employment and seafarer rights this workforce will depend on for their health and safety is not fit for purpose. A just transition was promised, and a just transition there must be for our maritime and offshore workers as well as for our planet. Let me detail the tragedy which brought these failures to light. On Sunday, 22nd January, a man went missing from Valaris 121, a mobile offshore drilling unit being towed to Dundee and located some 98 miles from Aberdeen. Police Scotland investigated, and while satisfied that no criminal investigation was required, had concerns regarding wider health and safety issues which they referred to the Health and Safety Executive, HSE. Now, this is something that HSE would normally investigate. That they did so here is perhaps indicative of the concerns that police had raised, for this is not the same as an industrial accident on land, nor is it similar to that on an oil or gas rig on the UK continental shelf, or even on a fixed or floating wind turbine in the UK exclusive economic zone. HSE legislation has rightly been extended to cover workers' rights, but it is incomplete, and as a result, workers are at greater risk. For mobile drilling units like Valaris 121, when towed, are classified as a ship or a vessel, meaning they fall out with HSE jurisdiction and within that of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, the MCA. Accordingly, whilst HSE could and very likely would have carried out a full investigation had this been on land, a rig, or even a turbine, they're restricted in what they can do here. Likewise, a report which may have seen a fatal accident inquiry in Scotland or a coroner's court hearing in England and Wales will not happen here. Why is that? It's because it's not classified as a health and safety issue giving HSE authority. Instead, it's considered a maritime safety matter, and the MCA have authority and lead these investigations through the Marine Accident Investigation Branch.
Oh, did we get the one?
By all means.
I commend them for bringing this forward. For when it comes to health and safety, we're all very concerned about it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm just wondering, the fact that the offshore energy and what they create comes on land to Scotland and to England. Is there some role for the health and safety here? Even though, as the Honourable Gentleman has outlined very clearly, maritime take preference, but if the energy is coming here, if the workers work out of Scotland and England, is there not a responsibility there?
Well, as I've come on to say, I welcome my colleague's intervention. HSE does a good job onshore, in oil and gas, and on turbines. We require to extend their powers. They are the agency, as I'll come on to say. MCA and MEIB do a wonderful job in preserving life and ensuring wider maritime safety, but they're not qualified in industrial accidents, nor are employment laws within their remit. Fundamentally, and worsening that handicap in expertise, is the fact that MCA don't even have responsibility for the investigation or jurisdiction here. That's because this incident occurred out with UK territorial waters, which extend to 12 miles. Beyond that distance, even when within the UK exclusive economic zone of 200 miles and on the UK continental shelf, it is subject to international maritime regulations. They prescribe that the investigating agency is to be from the vessel's flag state. That is the country where the ship is registered. Valaris 121 is registered in Liberia, a flag state which is managed in Virginia, USA. Accordingly, we have the absurdity of responsibility for an investigation and jurisdiction in enforcement for an incident leading to the death of a UK worker resting not with police or Crown, HSE or MCA, or even with an organisation based in Edinburgh or London, but in the flag state Liberia, a country located on another continent. Now, that country is one of the world's largest shipping registers and is categorised by the International Transport Workers Federation as a flag of convenience. This means that employment and safety standards are at the international minimum and ship owners pay no tax to the Liberian state. That alone is an issue of concern, as questions are sometimes raised regarding registration, let alone supervision. Despite numerous questions, I'm unable to be advised how many vessels operating in the UK sector are foreign flagged. That also should be a concern, as anecdotally it would seem the vast majority are not registered on the red ensign. This despite the government's obsessions with wrapping things in the Union Jack. The Lord Advocate advised that a multi-agency meeting took place to discuss the incident involving representatives of MCA, HSE, Police Scotland, Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Republic of Liberia to discuss who would take primacy for the various investigations. I don't know, but assume this was a virtual meeting and likewise don't know who or at what level of seniority the representative of Liberia was. She explained further that Police Scotland remain in charge of the missing person inquiry, though sadly the body may never be recovered. The Lord Advocate also confirmed that HSE remained the lead agency for the investigation, no doubt in Scotland and the UK. But doing what and enforcing which laws? Is that because there's no one here from Liberia to do it and the only folk nearby are HSE? Will we simply see a report filed and no further action taken? More importantly, how does this address the failure to extend legislation providing for health and safety at work in the oil and gas sector into the new world of offshore wind, other renewable energies and nascent green technologies such as hydrogen, carbon capture and storage and LNG? Because leaving aside the good intentions of the Lord Advocate and diligent work by the HSE, let's recall where jurisdiction and enforcement lie. That is with the flag state, which is Liberia. Let me again set out why that is, and all of which has been confirmed by repeated parliamentary answers from several government departments. Health and safety legislation applies to workers on land and operating the UK territorial waters of 12 miles, as my colleague mentioned earlier. Through the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, application outside Great Britain Order 2013, it applies to oil and gas and even applies to turbines. But that is insufficient for the new sector, as I'll detail. The Valaris 121 is classified as a vessel or a ship, which means that it's not subject to those laws. As the tragedy happened out with UK territorial waters, it's classified as a maritime incident and hence a flag state and the absurdity of Liberian jurisdiction. But the issue of the absence of health and safety at rights goes far wider than simply this incident or this vessel. It goes to the very heart of how the new sector that we are transitioning to operates. As disclosed in Parliamentary Answer 139284 from the Department of Work and Pensions, health and safety protection under the 2013 order apply to those operating in the offshore wind sector when on a structure or machine, with the provisions applying to structures for the production of energy from wind and to the operation of cables for transmitting electricity from an energy structure. All well, you might think, but no. It goes on to specifically state ships are not defined as energy structures for the purposes of this legislation. And therein lies the injustice in this North Sea tragedy. Equally, it discloses how the current provisions are incapable of providing the protections required for workers in this new sector. There are two clear reasons for that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Firstly, few work on a turbine as such. It's accessing them, maintaining and supporting them that matters. Workers do not live on them as with oil and gas rigs, or at least not yet, and any changes would see living accommodation likely confined to flotels, special operation vessels and other entirely separate solutions. Simply providing protection when physically working on the turbine totally ignores the nature of both the job and the sector. Secondly, Valaris is classified as a vessel or a ship, yet looking at her, she's not what most imagine a vessel or a ship to be, as she's designed as a working platform, some for drilling, others for working whilst attached to a turbine. If they're physically attached, then workers are covered, but travelling there or back, or even being proximate but not physically attached, which will likely be the bulk of the work, is not covered. The current legislation fails to take account of the operation and working practices in offshore wind. It's a sector that is expanding and developing, which means that more are denied cover in aspects that again lack protections. The danger is that this tragedy might be replicated and oft times more given the expansion of the sector. Health and safety protections that apply in oil and gas must be available in offshore wind and other renewables. I've had discussions with Offshore Energies UK who take safety extremely seriously, as you'd expect, and who have indicated an acceptance of the gap and a willingness to assist in resolving the situation. To address that, the definition of energy structures under the 2013 Act needs extended and legislation to protect seafarers operating in the offshore wind sector enacted. But so far the DWP have failed to show any interest. Will the Minister agree to meet with me and worker representatives to discuss this? Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, for a just transition there must be for our planet, but there must also be a just transition for workers, and this most certainly is not a just transition in the offshore wind sector.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I am grateful to the honourable member for East Lothian for bringing this important debate to the House, and I appreciate and understand the passion and conviction that he brings to this debate. The UK Government, Mr Deputy Speaker, takes very seriously health and safety on offshore wind farms in Great Britain's territorial sea and the UK continental shelf. And I will be keen to reassure the honourable gentleman that my officials at HSC confirm that we do have strong and an appropriate existing regulatory regime that applies for the protection afforded by the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974 to people working on offshore wind farms. And to the honourable member's concerns, let me spell out. The Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act 1974, application outside Great Britain Order 2013 applies. The provisions of the 1974 Act. This covers certain activities offshore, including work associated with offshore wind farms, as it does in other offshore installations such as oil and gas. And therefore, the 1974 Act applies to offshore wind farms in the territorial sea and within the UK continental shelf to renewable energy zones that are also defined in the 2013 order. Now, the 2013 order also applies the provision of the 1974 Act to offshore oil and gas installations in designated areas within the UK continental shelf. And I really do hope this pacifies the honourable gentleman. I'll say further and come to some of the points he's made. So, furthermore, Mr Deputy Speaker, the 1974 Act places a legal duty on employers to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety and welfare of workers and others to ensure that they are kept safe, whether they are working on oil or gas or indeed, as I say, wind farm installations. In addition, other legislation that applies to work on offshore wind farms includes the construction, design and management regulations. This helps employers to ensure their work is planned and the risks are assessed and managed. These regulations also ensure that employers consult and engage with workers and make sure that information is communicated to all those who need to know it. Now, the Health and Safety Executive, HSE, enforces the 1974 Act and subsidiary health and safety legislation on onshore wind farms. The HSE does not have the legal basis to enforce activities that are not specifically covered by the 2013 order. In these situations, however, other regulators and organisations would enforce health and safety legislation or investigate accidents. Therefore, to clarify, for example, in situations where a ship is in transit and HSE regulations do not apply, it would still need to comply with the national and international maritime standards. The Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, the MCA, is responsible for enforcing all merchant shipping regulations in respect of occupational health and safety, the safety of vessels, safe navigation and indeed operation. This includes manning levels and crew competency. Now, merchant shipping health and safety regulations extend to all those working on the ship and any work activities undertaken on board. These powers of the MCA extend to UK ships anywhere in the world and to non-UK ships which are within UK territorial waters. And the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, MABE, investigates maritime accidents involving UK vessels worldwide and all vessels in UK territorial waters. Its role is to help prevent further avoidable accidents, Mr Deputy Speaker, from occurring, but not to establish blame or liability. Now, for foreign flagged ships in the UK continental shelf, the responsibility for investigating accidents lies within the flag state. A memorandum of understanding between HSE, the MCA and MABE ensures effective collaborative working. Each organisation has differing responsibilities for health and safety enforcement and indeed accident investigation. An operational working agreement provides clarity and consistency where the jurisdiction of HSE, MCA and MABE overlap. It outlines the key and supporting principles to be adopted when selecting the lead organisation for health and safety enforcement and indeed accident investigation. Now, HSE's Energy Division has a team of inspectors, Mr Deputy Speaker, who are dedicated to the regulation of work activities at offshore wind farms. They are supported by various onshore and offshore specialists that provide technical advice on a range of relevant subjects, including inspection, investigation and enforcement of high-risk activities. This addresses poor health and safety performance and provides reassurance there is good health and safety management of such activities. Of course, and I'll let the honourable gentleman...
Having spoken earlier with Offshore Energies UK and indeed with the RMT, this isn't a criticism of any existing government or indeed past government. There is a legislative gap that exists because technology has moved so fast and nobody anticipated it. But we now have a situation which I think is accepted by employers and employees' representatives, that those working in that sector are not getting the proper coverage that should apply. Does the Minister not accept that there is something wrong here, that primacy rests with Liberia, and that what we require to do is to extend the 2013 Act to the new operations as they exist, and indeed as they may very well come about, that we don't even know the operation will be in a few years' time?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I will go on to make some further points, and then hopefully we can come to a mutual arrangement where some of those issues that he's raised, that he can be reassured about, and those that he mentioned can come into the conversation. I hope that will be helpful. So I'll come on to some of those points as I conclude my remarks. In regard to the HSE's Energy Division, hopefully I've spelt out how that we have inspectors dedicated to that regulation of work activities at offshore wind farm. But I absolutely accept the honourable gentleman's premise that there's a lot going on in this sector and that reassurance needs to be sought. And I have obviously spelt out some of the regulatory activity. We get that. HSE, as I say, works with industry bodies and UK regulators to ensure sensible solutions are found, and for the honourable gentleman to know also to emerging risks. So I hope that helps him. In regard to the application of shipping standards, where the HSE regulations do not apply to work activities on ships because they fall outside the scope of the HSWA and the 2013 order, international shipping regulations provide a broadly equivalent level of safety as appropriate to international shipping, and international conventions for shipping such as Solaris, MARPOL and the Maritime Labour Convention 2006 set a level playing field as all ships are surveyed by their flag and can be inspected by port states against the internationally agreed standards. And under this regime, Valaris was inspected by the MCA when it reached port in the UK, but I do understand and appreciate the honourable gentleman's points. In regard to Valaris 121, the Health and Safety Executive has served an improvement contempt notice on Ensco Offshore UK Limited relating to incorrectly installed gratings on the Valaris 121 when it was in port in Dundee. In regard to the flag state investigations of accidents occurring in UK CS, the flag state of the ship involved is responsible for ensuring an investigation is conducted and completed in accordance with the Casualty Investigation Code. The Casualty Investigation Code, the code, mandates certain incidents set out in Chapter 1, Part A of the 1974 Convention of the Safety of Life at Sea, Solaris, Solaras, I should say, are investigated. Now, turning to flags of convenience, which the honourable gentleman raised, open registers can pose a challenge for maritime security and enforcement of laws on the high seas. And this is because some flag states do not or cannot exercise effective oversight of the ships on their register, and I think he pointed that out. While there is some evidence of poor practice taking place under open registries, there is no direct correlation between poor performing ships and open registries. However, Liberia, Bahamas and the Marshall Islands are all open registries and were at the top of the 15 countries for low detention rates under the Paris Memorandum of Understanding for Port State Control in 2021. So I think it's important where flag states do not have independent investigation bodies that may investigate accidents in UKCS. So the maritime administrations for Isle of Man, Bermuda, Cayman Islands and Gibraltar do not have, for example, independent investigation bodies, therefore do have difficulty ensuring safety investigations are impartial and objective. So therefore, a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, has been reached, Mr Deputy Speaker, which the UK's Maritime Accident Investigation Branch, MABE, agrees to investigate accidents involving ships that are registered with those marine administrations. And the procedure for those investigations is set out in legislation in force in all the relevant marine administrations' territory, and they will therefore apply. I'm going to cover two other points and hopefully start to be able to conclude. But in regard to the responsibility in terms of health and safety of workers travelling to and from offshore workplaces, the Honourable Gentleman would be keen to know the responsibility for regulating the health and safety of workers travelling to and from offshore workplaces, wind farms or indeed gas and oil installations rests with the Maritime Coastal Agency, the MCA, within the territorial sea and UK flagged vessels. The responsibility for health and safety enforcement activities and the accident investigation described in the Memorandum of Understanding between the HSE, the MCA and the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, MABE. This is supported by an operational working agreement which, Mr Deputy Speaker, provides clarity and consistency where jurisdiction in terms of the respective agencies do overlap. In terms of those transiting to and from offshore workplaces, the responsibility for regulating those workers indeed rests with the MCA, the Maritime Coastal Agency, within the territorial sea and for UK flagged vessels. Again, the responsibility for health and safety enforcement activities and accident investigation is again an MOU between HSE, the MCA and the Marine Accident Investigation Branch, MABE. This is supported by an operational working agreement, again, which provides clarity and consistency where the jurisdiction of respective agencies do overlap. So that travelling and transiting point, I understand the point the Honourable Gentleman is making. Does he want to come in?
I hope the Minister would accept that the whole technology is changing, and most of these new turbines are going to be out with UK territorial waters in many instances, which changes the nature of the jurisdiction. The organisations that she's referred to, MEIB, etc., have skills, but they're not skills in health and safety at work. And the fundamental difficulty is that the nature of the operation is not attached to the physical turbine. The nature of the activity is either accessing it or working in close proximity, which is why this man went off a ship that had been doing that, and yet it's faced with Liberia, and it's on that basis that I'm seeking for the Government to extend the 2013 Act because of the new world that we face, and indeed anticipating a new world that we don't know just what the nature of the North Sea is going to look, but it's going to look a very busy workforce and a very busy working place, much different to what we've got at the moment.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman. I think he's made a really important point in terms of learnings from what's happened, making sure that this is fit for purpose, and above all that he and those workers involved feel reassured. And I want to reassure him that the HSE does work closely with G+, the offshore wind health and safety organisation, and its members to promote understanding of offshore wind farm regime and the regulations which I've spelt out tonight. In regard to EU retained law, which I know he covered, the Health and Safety Executive remains focused on ensuring that regulatory frameworks maintain the UK's high standards, Mr Deputy Speaker, in terms of health and safety protection, and continue, though, at the same time to reduce burdens for business. The HSE's approach closely aligns with the Government's pledge to do more for businesses to promote growth by removing disproportionate burdens and simplifying the regulatory regime. Our standards in health and safety and protections are, though, among the highest in the world, and the HSE will continue to review its retained EU law to seek opportunities to reduce those burdens, promote growth but not reduce health and safety standards. Finally, in conclusion, I have, I hope, set out, Mr Deputy Speaker, the regulatory framework that is in place to ensure the health and safety of people working at offshore wind farms, and have detailed that HSE is one of a number of regulators and organisations that work together to ensure employers maintain health and safety standards in this sector and protect their workers. And I reassure the Honourable Gentleman that the UK Government continues to take health and safety very seriously on wind farms, and absolutely recognises the contribution made by this sector to energy security and the Net Zero programme. I do hope this goes in some way to reassure the Honourable Member that the current regulatory regime and framework is in place, that it's sufficiently robust to protect health and safety of workers. But as I appreciate, and he's made some excellent points this evening in this debate, it is a complex, growing and challenging picture, and I do offer to facilitate that meeting with the Honourable Gentleman, with my officials at HSE, along with those relevant government departments and other officials, so that we can further reassure the Honourable Gentleman, the sector, the employers and those that work in it, that his concerns are fully understood and addressed.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as I can say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the